A U-turn in the war with Iran. President Trump calls off strikes set for tonight, citing progress toward a deal. We'll lay out everything we know. A new nominee for intelligence director, the president announces his latest pick after his prior choice got major pushback. And the World Cup kicks off right here in North America. 48 teams from around the world are in our backyard vying for soccer's highest honor. We're going to break it down. Hey there, I'm Nancy Cordes in for Major Garrett. Welcome to The Takeout. It's a tale today of two social media posts. President Trump upended the global and domestic news cycles today with two announcements just 32 minutes apart. Let's handle them one at a time. First, hours before planned strikes on Iran, Trump announced that the attacks are off and said that a peace agreement has been reached with the Iranians. On social media, he wrote in part, quote, "Discussions and final points have been in both concept and great detail approved by all parties involved." Sources tell CBS News that a signing of a letter of intent is likely to be held early next week, and that would kick off a 60-day process to negotiate the details of the agreement. It was a stunning about-face from just this morning when President Trump called in to Fox News and promised more attacks, threatening to seize Iranian oil infrastructure and refusing to rule out boots on the ground. Still, the situation in the Strait of Hormuz hasn't changed yet. It is still effectively closed to traffic. Trump said the U.S. naval blockade is going to remain in effect until the peace deal is signed. Now to post number two. President Trump is nominating former Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman Jay Clayton to be the next director of national intelligence. Trump's original decision to name top housing official Bill Pulte as acting DNI was met with massive bipartisan pushback. Democrats and some Republicans have been blocking the extension of key surveillance powers over the selection of Pulte because he doesn't have intelligence experience. Pulte is still in line, though, to become acting DNI on June 19th, unless Clayton is confirmed by the Senate before then, and that would be a tall order. We're going to get to that story in a moment, but I want to begin with Caitlin Huey-Burns, who is at the White House on this Iran deal. Caitlin, just this morning, President Trump was threatening more strikes. He was saying he wanted to take over Karg Island. Now he's saying there's a deal. What changed so fast?
Yeah, Nancy, it's been a day of whiplash up here at the White House, exactly as you just described. The president did an interview with Fox News earlier today saying that he was planning to send more bombs to Iran, and then just hours later backtracked with a new social media post, and then just about an hour ago talked to reporters in the Oval Office and said that a deal is at hand here. But we should note, we should always take all of this with a grain of salt, because we have been in a position before where he is saying a deal is imminent. This time, however, he said today that these strikes that they already made over the past couple of days really forced Iran's hand here. I want to talk a little bit about what is in this agreement that is not yet officially an agreement, that still has to be signed. The president said that they could sign it as soon as this weekend. It would essentially open up talks for the next 60 days. This is an agreement to negotiate over Iran and its nuclear program. It would immediately open up the Strait of Hormuz upon signing of this deal. And also, CBS News has learned that part of this agreement would be to find a way to have Iran commit to not enriching uranium for 15 to 20 years. Now, all of this, all of the details remain to be seen here. Of course, Iran, through Iranian state media, is saying that they have not agreed to anything. Nothing's been in writing yet. And so there are those caveats here. But notably, this comes after 2 straight days of attacks against Iran by the U.S. And the political pressure, of course, that the president has been feeling for a while now, that is building and building. So whether, in fact, something is signed this weekend, early next week, still remains to be seen. And again, the deal at hand is a deal to negotiate further. So a lot more to play out here, Nancy. And who knows, could have another whiplash-inducing social media post. We never rule that sort of thing out.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, your caution and your caveats are noted. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. CBS News Pentagon reporter Eleanor Watson joins us now. Ellie, good to see you. It's been a busy day for you as well. The ceasefire had been crumbling over the last few days. What do we know about the state of hostilities right now?
I would say, Nancy, the ceasefire is still essentially on life support, still pretty fragile, but President Trump has called off tonight's strikes that he announced just this morning because of this diplomatic progress, he notes. What seems to be different is that he is saying the negotiations have now reached the top levels of the Iranian government, including the supreme leader, to his understanding. What is not clear is whether this is the agreement that has been on the table or whether the past few nights of bombings have forced further concessions from Iran. Iranian state media, as Caitlin said, has not said that there's a final agreement, so there's no guarantee that the tit-for-tat strikes we've seen throughout the ceasefire are over for good.
Ellie, the president, when he was on Fox News this morning, was asked about these alleged U.S. strikes on a reservoir and water facilities in southern Iran, and he didn't deny that it had happened. What is the Pentagon saying, if anything, about this alleged attack on civilian infrastructure in Iran?
Throughout today, the Pentagon has not said anything, but Secretary Hegseth was asked last night about this, and he called it a disingenuous question that I'm used to from the media, impugning the motives of the folks on our side who are incredibly professional and incredibly effective. He's calling it a disingenuous question, but there have been questions about civilian infrastructure and civilian targets since the beginning, especially from Democratic lawmakers who repeatedly point out that there was a strike on an Iranian girls' school in the opening days of the war that killed 150 girls and staff members. U.S. Central Command is still investigating that incident, but there are questions from that incident early on in the war.
And it's an important question because the president himself has repeatedly threatened to strike civilian infrastructure, which would signal that he is open to something that a lot of human rights groups say is a war crime. The president has been making some pretty astounding claims about this secret U.S. operation in the dead of night to smuggle millions of barrels of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. How accurate are these claims that he is making, and how were they able to do this without the Iranians knowing?
What I understand this to be, what the president is talking about, is a kind of Project Freedom Light. If you remember back in May, they announced this operation to help guide tankers and commercial ships that have been bottled up in the strait through the strait. That operation was called off after day one, but there seemed to be some residual impacts of the U.S. forces helping guide without having any ships actually in the Arabian Gulf, without having any destroyers. U.S. forces have been coordinating ships to get through. We reported on this a few weeks ago. At the time, they were getting about 3 ships per day through. The president now says over 100 million barrels of oil have gotten through. That, to put it in perspective, before the war, 20 million barrels per day were getting through just per day. And so while there is this uptick in some ships getting through, it's not to the level of the strait being completely open.
Right. And that's obviously the only thing that's really going to measurably change oil prices globally. Eleanor Watson, thank you so much. Appreciate it. CBS News national security analyst Aaron McClain joins me now. He also hosts the School of War podcast. Okay, Aaron, total whiplash again today. How are you squaring the strikes from yesterday, the threats of new strikes just this morning, with this sudden potential agreement?
What a day, Nancy. What a day it has been. Look, I have some multi-layered skepticism of where we're going here. And I want to be clear, it's absolutely possible that we will see a deal signed in Europe this weekend and the Strait of Hormuz open next week. It's possible. But before we get there, and we'll have a lot of questions if we get there because this whole deal MOU structure is very complicated. I just want to read you a statement of the president from earlier in this process. He said, this is some time ago, almost all of the various points of past contention have been agreed to between the United States and Iran. On behalf of the United States of America as president and also representing the countries of the Middle East, it's an honor to have this long-term problem close to resolution. Nancy, that was on April the 7th. That is part of the ceasefire announcement that the president issued on April the 7th. So I long ago lost count of how many times we said we were this close to a deal, but here we are, this close to a deal again.
So what you're trying to figure out essentially is whether there is actual progress, whether these strikes over the past few days have pushed Iran to get on board with this agreement, or whether the president is once again overstating the progress he has made.
That's a good way of putting it. I certainly agree with your suggestion there. The president has repeatedly threatened very substantial strikes on economic targets in Iran. The way he usually talks about it is, we're going to do bridge and tunnel day. We're going to bridge and power plant day. Excuse me. We're going to strike the bridges and the power plants. We haven't done that. The strikes over the last few days, despite this confusion over the water plant, which is an interesting angle that I know we're running down. For the most part, the strikes have been, radar facilities, tactical targets, if you like, operationally relevant targets in the Strait of Hormuz area. They are not necessarily strikes that do anything other than move the ball on the battle for the Strait of Hormuz. They're not really regime-threatening, economy-threatening strikes. Is it possible these strikes have altered Ahmed Vahidi's, the head of the IRGC's decision calculus? It's possible. It's a little hard for me to see how that would be the case.
Okay, so let's say the president is right, that there is an agreement, that Vice President J.D. Vance is going to be going to Europe this weekend to sign it. If that is the case, how long would it take to see the Strait of Hormuz fully reopened?
Well, the most important step should be essentially instantaneous, which is the Iranians asserting that they are not going to shoot at ships in the strait anymore, and then stopping to do so. Of course, as your question suggests, there's a bunch of other stuff that would then have to follow that takes time. Insurance companies would have to get comfortable. We would have to address this mine issue, which it's not totally clear where things stand in terms of the locations of these mines. It does seem like we have a route open in the waters off of Oman that we have been bringing a limited number of ships through, as Ali Watson has described. So there's, it's not like the end of next week is going to see a return to 130, 140 ships a day like it was before the war, if in fact this goes through. But the most important thing is Iran actually asserting and then sticking to its assertion that it's going to stop doing violence to traffic in the Strait, and that should be basically an on-off switch.
Got it. So basically the questions we have are, is this agreement real? And if so, what exactly is in it? Aaron McLean, thanks so much for breaking it down with us. Appreciate it. President Trump has announced a major shift in a controversial appointment. He says he's going to nominate Jay Clayton to be the Director of National Intelligence, the nation's most important intelligence position, after backlash against his original pick. The president initially wanted his top housing official, Bill Pulte, to serve as acting director, but opponents criticized Pulte's lack of experience for the job. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian is on Capitol Hill, where they've been fighting this out. Nicole, good to see you. Tell us a little bit more about Jay Clayton and his background. Does he have any more intel experience than Bill Pulte does?
Well, it's not clear. What we do know is that he is currently serving as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and prior to that, he was the chair of the SEC. But again, unclear the extent of his national security experience. Still, though, he is, for now at least, being received positively from some Senate Republicans, most notably John Thune, the majority leader, who said that he has a good reputation. He thinks that he has strong organizational skills, and he did commit to try to move his nomination as quickly as possible. But it still doesn't change the dynamics here on Capitol Hill in terms of many Democrats who still want to see the acting director, Bill Pulte, removed from his post. That, in essence, was Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's response when he was asked whether he was even supportive of Clayton. So really, it seems like we continue to be at an impasse over not only the Director of National Intelligence, but ultimately kind of what this means for the government's warrantless surveillance program known as FISA, which is due to potentially lapse as soon as tomorrow.
Right, and the reason Democrats were so upset about Bill Pulte is not just because of his lack of experience, but also because as a housing official, he had recommended that multiple Trump foes be charged with mortgage fraud. So that is underlying all of this as well. Nicole, President Trump made this announcement about Clayton just a few hours after the House struck down that spy bill extension you mentioned over opposition to Pulte. So is the Clayton pick going to satisfy lawmakers enough that they'll be willing to pass this bill and keep some of these spy powers from lapsing?
Well, that's what I was alluding to. In effect, no. I mean, they're gone. The senators have left, the House has left, and more specifically, the House has left not just for the weekend, but they won't be back until the end of June, June 23rd, to be more specific. We will see the Senate come back, and they did before they left try to pass a short-term extension. We saw an attempt made in the Senate through a process known as unanimous consent, but a Democrat, Ron Wyden, objected. And of course, in the House earlier today, we saw a short-term extension vote fail. In fact, it didn't even get a majority of votes, and that is significant because it needed a much higher threshold to clear, which means Democrats really needed to be on board here, and they weren't. So this does likely mean that we will see a lapse in the government's spy powers, and a lot of lawmakers have expressed concerns about that, both Democrat and Republicans, as we certainly approach the start of the World Cup. You have these America 250 events that are happening. Obviously, the conflict continues abroad with Iran, so there are some real concerns about this program going dark, but Democrats continue to insist under no circumstances, considering Bill Pulte and how they feel he weaponized federal housing agency against some of the president's so-called enemies. They really don't think that he should have the reins, even on a temporary basis, at the DNI, and so that is why they voted in large numbers not to advance this FISA reauthorization today.
And it would certainly be a tall order to try to get Clayton confirmed before Pulte is scheduled to take over the DNI position in about a week and a half. So this controversy continues. Nicole Killian, thanks so much.
You bet.
Still to come on The Takeout, Congressman Kevin Kiley joins us on set to discuss Iran and his congressional runoff. Plus, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. A new report breaks down how the so-called CRINC countries could be threatening the U.S. and our allies. And later, the battle for the World Cup trophy is officially on. A former player with her own experience on the world stage tells us what to watch. You're not going to want to miss that. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. President Trump has abruptly canceled planned airstrikes on Iran just a few hours before the scheduled launch. In a statement on social media, the president said he changed his mind because progress has been made in peace negotiations. Joining me to talk about this is Congressman Kevin Kiley, an independent who caucuses with Republicans. He just advanced to the general election for California's redrawn 6th Congressional District. Congressman, congratulations. Thanks for being with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So what's your take on this supposed deal that the president just announced? Do you and your colleagues believe that this really is an agreement that would end hostilities in the war with Iran?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, if it leads to us not resuming hostilities, and if it leads to deterrence of Iran's nuclear ambitions and a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, that's obviously very good news. But we need to make sure it's on a solid footing. And so people, I think, are a little tired of the whiplash, and there's skepticism about whether, that will lead to a durable solution. So what we really need in order to make sure that if this is coming together, as we hope it is, to assure that it lasts, is we need to have Congress centrally involved, we need to have our allies involved, we need to have the Gulf states involved. So that's where this needs to be going.
Does it hurt the president's credibility with Republicans and with your constituents when he consistently makes claims about how close he is to a deal that seem to differ with one another from day to day?
Well, he has his style of going about these negotiations, and there may be some room for that in these high-level situations. However, we need to have stability as well and predictability, and all of the various players who are involved in this complex geopolitical scenario, need to have the assurance that what is said today will hold. And so that's why I think it's important to have Congress involved and have our allies involved.
I want to ask you about this surveillance bill today that failed. This means that a key spy power is going to lapse, at least temporarily, because of concern about the president's pick for acting director of national intelligence. How concerned are you about that lapse? Congress can't be that concerned because they're all going home.
Yeah, I'm extremely concerned. I don't think Congress should go home with this program having lapsed. And it's kind of the ultimate example of partisanship polarization reaching peak levels. You know, it used to be that whatever else we might disagree about, we can at least come together when the vital national security interests of the United States are at stake. But now this vital national security program, FISA Section 702, is going to go dark because Congress has failed to act.
And what do you think that's going to mean?
Well, it could mean a lot of things in terms of our ability to get the actionable intelligence we need to deter threats to the United States. Anyone who is in the intelligence community will tell you how vital this program is. So hopefully, now that we have a new pick for Director of National Intelligence, we can find a way to get this revived very quickly.
Do you support Jay Clayton? You think he'd be a good director?
I know Jay Clayton from his reputation with the SEC. He's a serious person, obviously a big improvement over the last pick. I don't know exactly what his experience is in intelligence, but he seems like the sort of person has the right disposition for this role.
Your colleague, Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, indirectly criticized House Speaker Mike Johnson this week. He said the House is being poorly managed. Do you agree, and what do you think needs to be done differently?
Well, I've had a lot of opinions about how the House could run better during my time in Congress. I think that, first and foremost, we have to defend the institutional prerogatives, the constitutional authority of the House of Representatives. And so I've been very critical of things the House has done to sort of cede that authority or not be in the driver's seat when it comes to important policy on things like tariffs. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your race, shall we? You left the Republican Party. You're in this new district. You still caucus with Republicans, but you're officially an independent. This newly redrawn district favors Democrats. So what's your path to victory?
Well, my path is actually the same path that I've pursued in the past, which is to build a coalition of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. In my last race, and this is when I was still affiliated with the Republican Party, I actually got the second most crossover votes of any competitive race in the country. I ran 8 points ahead of the president in the presidential race in my race. And so I think that that's because I have delivered for my district in a way that transcends partisanship. And I think that's where the voters of this district are at. They see what extreme partisanship has done to our country. They see what it's done to our state in California, where you have the highest cost of living in the country. But they also see what independent leadership has meant for our district. And we've really been able to attain a quality of life that you don't see in other parts of California.
You've been a big critic of redistricting around the country. You've even introduced legislation to try to address it. Would you feel this strongly if you were in a safe Republican district?
I absolutely would. As a matter of fact, I could have exploited the whole gerrymandering scheme and then run in a safe Republican district, which many people expected me to do. But I thought that would be making things worse, and I wanted to make them better. I wanted to chart a different course. And when it comes to gerrymandering, I've opposed it from the very beginning in Texas, in California, in Virginia, in Florida, wherever. I think gerrymandering is a plague on democracy, and I've introduced legislation to bring this whole terrible redistricting war to an end.
A lot of people feel the same way you do. Congressman Kevin Kiley of California, thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Later this hour, it's a position few people outside of Capitol Hill even know about. So why has it become a target for President Trump? What exactly does the Senate parliamentarian do, and how is she connected to controversial voting legislation? We're going to explain soon. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. A new report is raising red flags about the threat that authoritarian regimes pose to human rights and democracy around the world. According to the George W. Bush Institute, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are undermining global order and free societies. This new report says that group of 4 countries, known by the acronym CRINC, pose a collective threat to the U.S. and to our allies. Here to talk more are the 2 authors of the report, Igor Kreshtin and Joseph Kim from the George W. Bush Institute. Welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Igor, I'll start with you. Is it your argument that these 4 countries are acting in concert to some degree? And if so, what are their shared goals?
they are acting in increased alignment. We're calling it malign alignment. This is not an alliance in the traditional sense, alliances that the United States built based on values, but this is an alignment of interest to undermine U.S. global leadership, to hurt us and hurt our allies, and to build a new global order based on authoritarian values and authoritarianism in general.
What do they gain, Joseph, by undermining democracies like the United States and others?
In my opinion, the more America loses its authority around the world, it is in their best interest, right? Because the difference between power and authority, in my opinion, is that power is the ability to force compliance by virtue of having great economic and military powers. But authority, in my opinion, is something so unique that it's something that you have to earn it. And America earned its authority through carrying human rights at home and defending democracies at home and abroad. And I think the more Americans are step away from these founding principles that is good for us and good for the rest of the world, it gives indirectly legitimacy for them to continue being in the power.
Igor, can you give an example of the ways that these countries might be working together to weaken democracy?
Well, absolutely. The first and foremost is Russia's war against Ukraine. This is an authoritarian regime under Vladimir Putin that is attempting to subjugate a free peoples and a democracy. And one of our recommendations is that we help Ukraine with that challenge. The other example you'll see is Xi Jinping recently visited North Korea. Before that, Vladimir Putin visited Xi Jinping. These countries are increasingly working together in places like Russia, building factories using Iranian drone technology, with North Korean workers, Chinese components to use against Ukrainian civilians. So that's one example of these regimes working together. They're working in bilateral ways, they're working in multilateral ways, and collectively, their goal remains to undermine U.S. power.
And so how do the U.S. and other countries collectively push back against that growing influence? Is the answer to create sort of, you know, a NATO-like organization aimed at these four countries?
I think NATO-like alliances certainly is welcomed. In my opinion, America can counter this threat by reinvesting in our alliances, in our partnerships, and reinvest and maintain our soft power in coordination with our allies. Because after all, these authoritarian regimes are collaborating amongst each other, and they become greater threat to America by be able to solidifying their power. So I think America and with its allies, we should also find a way to collaborate, increasing our power and authority to counter these threats. And also, Congress and America can also increase its sanctions enforcement, because sanctions without enforceability, has lose its effectiveness. So I would say, reiterate my point, reinvest in our alliance and partnerships. Second, recognize that soft power is amazing thing that we have. We have built this over decades, so it is in our best interest to protecting it. Three is to improve our sanctions enforcement.
This is something that you both know personally about. Joseph, you escaped North Korea as a young person. Igor, you grew up in Ukraine. So you know what you're talking about when you talk about the influence of these countries.
Absolutely. It's these personal experiences that I think strengthen our belief about U.S. as a global power for good, as a force for good in the world. As President Reagan used to say, the shining city on the hill, that this is the 250th anniversary of America's founding. This is the perfect year to talk about the amazing democratic experiment that we have and a light that we shine on the world. And that's an example that led my family to come here to the United States, for Joseph as well. So this is something that really greatly informs our work and strengthens it.
And it's an ongoing issue. Igor Creston, Joseph Kim, thank you so much from the George W. Bush Institute for joining us here today.
Thank you for having us.
Coming up, why a top Democrat wants Vice President J.D. Vance to testify in the high-profile case surrounding the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. We'll get to that and more with our political panel. You're watching Takeout. Welcome back to the Takeout. Senate Majority Leader John Thune is pushing back against President Trump's call to fire the Senate parliamentarian. Trump says this move would clear the way for Republicans to pass the controversial Save America Act, which would require voters to show photo ID to cast a ballot. The parliamentarian is an unelected official who oversees the Senate and helps enforce its rules. Why is this role so important to the president? Daniela Diaz joins us now to explain. She is a politics reporter for Notice. Daniela, good to see you.
Good to see you, Nancy.
So explain to the non-Capitol Hill denizens out there how exactly this role works, why it's important, and why President Trump cares about who's in the position.
Yeah, Nancy, it's really interesting because the Senate parliamentarian is one of the most important jobs in the U.S. Senate, but it's held by someone who is not very well known by the United States, by normal Americans. In this case, her name is Elizabeth McDonough. She's been in place since 2012. And one of her most important jobs is to review legislation that is going under budget reconciliation, which basically means it would help with budget and expenses in the United States. It has to have revenue, budget issues to be able to be passed, but with just a simple majority in the Senate. So instead of the normal 60 votes that's needed for the filibuster, it only needs 50 votes. Now, her job is to review every single measure to make sure that it has budget concerns and that it actually addresses budgetary concerns. Otherwise, it's struck by her in the legislation. And that's what we've seen with the SAVE Act and what you saw with President Donald Trump when he posted on Truth Social calling for her to be fired, saying that she needs to be able to allow that the SAVE Act be included in budget reconciliation legislation so that it's just passed with just a simple Senate majority, meaning only Republicans need to pass it. And as a result, what we're seeing is Senate Majority Leader John Thune stand by not wanting to fire her because, of course, she's been in position since 2012, more than a decade.
Right. And this is important because President Trump isn't just trying to pass this bill with reconciliation. He has passed a lot using reconciliation, which only requires a simple majority. So why is Thune holding the line here? Why not give this to President Trump?
Look, Elizabeth McDonough, the Senate parliamentarian, has been in office since Harry Reid was the Senate Majority Leader, since Barack Obama was president. She has had this position and has a lot of institutional knowledge in this position for over a decade. She served in Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. And her role is really important as a behind-the-scenes person who reviews these measures and really important bills and really important budget reconciliation bills that are passed by Democrats and Republicans, depending on who has the majority. So to fire her would set a really bad precedent and would mean that maybe if Democrats take the majority in 2026, Nancy, they could put in place their own Senate parliamentarian to be able to pass their own measures. I mean, this is a precedent that's been held for decades in the Senate and could really disrupt how these things are passed with budget reconciliation.
Interesting point of tension between the president and the Republican leader. Daniela Diaz from Notice, thank you so much. And let's turn now to our political panel. Democratic strategist and former advisor to President Biden, John McCarthy, and former Michigan Republican Congressman Peter Meijer. Welcome to both of you. Peter, maybe I'll start with you since you served on the House side, not the Senate side, with the Senate parliamentarian. But does the fact that Leader Thune has been willing to push back against President Trump on this issue and others, like the filibuster, signal that there is growing tension between Republican leadership and President Trump?
I don't know that it's a growing tension. I mean, there is institutional responsibilities that Senator Thune has. Obviously, as Daniela was saying, the Senate parliamentarian will be the Senate parliamentarian potentially in a Democratic trifecta. You want to maintain some of those checks. It's similar to the filibuster in that those are things that could be gotten away with. He could fire her. What are the downstream consequences of that? And are there other ways to pass this legislation without having to go through those processes? Because while I would love to see, elements of the SAVE Act be implemented, they could also very easily be undone and or made exceedingly worse if Democrats had the trifecta down the line. And again, if they didn't have a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, it's things like the Byrd rule and having a parliamentarian that hews closely to that will be that check to prevent excesses from occurring.
John, there must have been times when you were in the White House that you were frustrated with decisions that the parliamentarian made that didn't benefit your side.
Yeah, whether it was in the White House or when I worked on Capitol Hill. I mean, frustration with the parliamentarians or the process is something that politicians will always run into. But, I actually think that there is a bit more of a, starker line here for Republicans and the president at this moment because of that. And to me, it's that I think if you can bet on anything in Washington, it's that politicians want to get reelected. And I think that these Republicans in the House and Senate are looking around at each other and the president's numbers. They know that his popularity is failing, and they're looking for some kind of path to distinguish themselves, to step away because they know that this isn't going to age well. So I think you've seen this increasingly over the last few weeks to months, and I think you'll see more and more of this as we look towards November.
Peter, let's talk about one of the issues that is affecting his popularity, and that's the war on Iran. He now says there is an agreement in the offing, some questions about what exactly that agreement looks like, if it really is ready to be signed. What's your reaction to that, and how's the war playing in Michigan, where you're from?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the type of thing that would be the first step to, again, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is leading to the higher energy prices, which are really the only thing that Americans are seeing as a consequence of this conflict. You do away with the higher gas prices, which, by the way, were a lot higher after Russia invaded Ukraine during the Biden administration. So important to keep that in context. But that goes back to normal.
But that wasn't because of something that we did, right?
But also we saw no benefit from that. If we can guarantee a nuclear-free Iran, if we can make sure that one of our chief antagonists in the region and throughout the world is brought to heel and is no longer able to sow chaos and violence throughout the region, that's a fantastic upside. That is very important to keep into consideration. So right now, folks are only seeing those high gas prices. Reopening the strait will immediately start to have, it's already had an impact on oil futures. You'll start to see that, again, kind of trickle down. I'm very optimistic because it makes sense in both directions. The economic consequences for the Iranians, they want to have the blockade that the U.S. has imposed after they close down the strait, that to be off the table. So that is not the ultimate solution, right? We are just at as the president would say, the concepts of a plan. This is a conceptual component, but that means that there is a basis to start talking, to build trust, and hopefully to get to something that'll be much more enduring once the strait has been resolved.
John, to Peter's point, if the president can get a deal signed with Iran, if he can force some concessions on their nuclear program and gas prices start to come down before November, does he turn what is currently a weakness into a strength?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I'll say this. Before I'm a Democrat, I'm an American. I mean, I, of course, hope that there's a plan here that works out for the sake of the country. And I think that most logical people in the country would agree with that. The problem is I don't think the president has actually brought the American public along with him on this. I think you laid out very well many of the things that could possibly come of this. I would say the president perhaps has not done that. And I think that that's something we see with voters over and over again. They're not looking and seeing direction from the White House about why we're in the middle of this conflict. They are just seeing high gas prices. They are just seeing high costs at the grocery store. And President Trump was put into office with a mandate to do something about that. And when you hear him, giving these press conferences that don't have clear direction, then pivoting to talking about arches and ballrooms and UFC fights, you don't really sit around and say, wow, this is a guy who really understands what I'm facing in my daily life. So I still think that he's looking at a big political problem from this.
New development today, the House Oversight top Democrat Robert Garcia said he wants J.D. Vance, the vice president, to testify on this matter. Peter, do you think that this is an issue that still resonates with voters at this point, the Jeffrey Epstein files, or do you think that they are more focused on economic issues?
It is not something that I have. Well, I will say I do have some people bring up the Epstein files to me in the context of some pretty dark and disturbing conspiracies that start to get into anti-Israel and anti-Semitic areas. That's really the only place. I think by and large, it is largely media driven. I think there's this expectation, and there are people who are amping up the possibility that finally we will have revealed this global cabal of pedophiles that are out there. And that was the conspiracy theory that formed the basis of QAnon on the right, going back close to a decade. It somehow morphed over to the left, and now is, the kind of Epstein class allegations you see Grant Plattner talking about. To your point on what actually has an impact on people's everyday lives. Yeah, gas prices do, inflation does. This is tabloid stuff that folks are finding a very salient political message to drive their narrow ambitions.
Former Congressman Peter Meijer, John McCarthy, thank you both so much for joining me. Appreciate it. Well, let the games begin. Up next, we break down day one of the FIFA Men's World Cup with a former soccer pro. You're watching The Takeout. The 2026 FIFA Men's World Cup is officially underway after years of buildup. The first match kicked off today between our fellow host nation, Mexico, and South Africa. In Mexico City, it drew fans from around the world. Mexico went on to win that game by a score of 2-0, putting the Mexican national team at the top of the Group A standing for the time being. In 2022, the U.S. made it to the round of 16. Tomorrow, the U.S. men's national team will begin their quest to hoist the World Cup against Paraguay in Los Angeles. Let's bring in MLS on Apple TV analyst and retired midfielder for the U.S. women's national team, Lori Lindsay. Lori, thank you so much for joining me. This is so exciting. Maybe we should start there. U.S. versus Paraguay. What do you think of that matchup and that group of four in general?
Yeah, it's going to be electric. I think exactly what we just saw in Mexico City for the first game of the tournament, just electric, exactly what you would expect. And then tomorrow night, the U.S. kickoff. So against Paraguay, listen, we've beaten Paraguay. We've beaten Australia recently. And then, so I feel good about this, but I think it's always about in the World Cup, getting off on the front foot, getting a really good, solid start, knowing that there's going to be excitement, there's going to be a lot of emotions, but you just play through that. And yeah, I think we're going to see a massive crowd, a crowd that's behind this U.S. team and be ready to go.
Let's talk about those emotions. As someone who has played in a Women's World Cup, how do the expectations, how does the pressure compare to any other major tournament?
It's immense. So it really is just about, one, getting the collective whole of a team on the same page and just fine-tuning different things leading up to this first game, and then throughout the tournament so that you are playing your best soccer and getting to the knockout stages. But at the same time, it's also just about what does each individual need and allowing for some space for the players to be able to decide what does the day between the games look like, what is the day leading up to the game look like in terms of preparation. So there's going to be a ton of emotions, but all of these guys play with big clubs. They've been in atmospheres that have big crowds, so they're going to be used to that. Now it's going to be a pro-American crowd where they're going to be cheered on and everybody's going to be excited for them. So again, it is all about an individual approach, but just harness the crowd, allow them to get behind you and go for it.
What are the biggest storylines of this World Cup? Who are the favorites and who are the underdogs that everyone is secretly rooting for?
Yeah, I think there's always a couple of favorites. I'm thinking France, Brazil, Spain is one of my favorites. They won a couple summers ago, Copa America, so they'll be looking to go back to back in terms of those Copa America and the World Cup tournaments. Argentina obviously won in 2022, and with Messi, Portugal with Ronaldo, those are the two of the biggest names in the world in terms of men's soccer. So I think a lot of eyes will be on those two teams in particular. In terms of like a dark horse, though, I've been looking at Norway. Obviously with the expanded field of teams going from 32 to 48, Norway is one of those teams that has not been in this tournament for a very long time. Erling Haaland, as you see right here, massive striker for Manchester City, and will be the one to carry this team. But it is like a group of death, Norway. But I think that they have a really good chance to surprise some teams.
Good tip. Good tip. We'll be watching Norway too now. Lori Lindsay, former midfielder, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
And that does it for the Takeout today. The Daily Report is coming up next. See you tomorrow.